Hello and welcome to Mental Health Matters with me, Dr. Audrey Tang. My co-host today is Judith Crosier, and today's topic is Earth Day. Environment and Earth Day. What a great day.
Lovely.
And today's theme, Earth Day's theme, is about trying to reduce our plastic waste. But let's wind it back even more and talk about just the benefits of getting outside.
It's my favourite place to be. I don't know about you, but I love being outside.
There's something just lovely about it, isn't there? Yeah. Just I love just feeling the sun. Well, when we get it in the UK.
Yeah, on the 15 days.
Yeah, exactly. But those moments, it's just beautiful.
It is. It has an instant effect, doesn't it? Just the sun on you. Just the brightness, but also the warmth. It's lovely. And even in the winter when it's not particularly warm, it's just lovely being out in the sunshine.
And it's so true. Just getting outside really makes a difference to me. And I know you're a dog owner, I'm a dog owner. Yes. And part of your work as well is actually looking after and walking dogs.
Exactly.
And to me, even when it's cold and grey and nasty out, I actually think it's important to just get that fresh air. To walk the dog?
I try and get out every single day with one of my dogs, just mid-afternoon, late afternoon, just to get outside, and immediately all the stresses of the day just seem to just disappear. Yeah. It's something to do with being peaceful, I think. Just walking with a dog, even in a town, or just having that space and time and just seeing the trees, the sky. Luckily I live in a village, if people are lucky enough to live, and they can see the green countryside as well. It's just amazing. It's very therapeutic.
Yeah, it really is. And the funny thing is, on the dog walk, and it's only 20 minutes in the morning for me, and 20 minutes in the afternoon, it's the only place I don't bring my phone. I actively leave my phone at home. I
don't take my phone either, unless I'm recording my miles on Strava or something, but I don't have my phone. It's just somewhere in my pocket.
Yeah.
But it's a way of being completely in a little bubble with you and your dog.
Yeah.
And me and my dog, I do the same.
And it gives you that sense of peace, and I absolutely love that. And actually, eco-psychology now, that's getting into doing these walk and talk coaching sessions. So rather than sit and tell me about your problems or the conventional way, actually, psychologists, including our resident psychologist, Dr. Meg Arrold, she'll walk with clients.
Wow.
And it's so much easier to talk that way.
It is, and it's something that when you're a teacher, as we both were, I don't know if you were taught this, but I was taught this specifically, that if you need to have a difficult conversation with a pupil, to be less confrontational, you don't look at them, you have them next to you, and you might look at something else or look at the wall or whatever, but you don't look at each other. And I can see why a wellbeing walk might be beneficial for that reason.
Yeah. And we have got such a great show lined up for you. I can't wait to tell you. Today's show for Earth Day, we've had the absolute pleasure of speaking with Alexandra Steed, the founder of Urban. She is a landscape architect, and she allowed our studio to follow her around for a documentary on her work, how she is making those little changes to preserve the environment, because as we were saying earlier, we love going for walks, but if we don't look after it, it won't be there for us anymore. And I was able to catch up with Alexandra in her time, so it is a recorded interview because she is based in Canada at the moment, and this is how we got on. It's such a pleasure to speak with you again, Alexandra, and welcome to Mental Health Matters. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's an absolute delight, Audrey. Thank you for having me.
It's always fun to talk about your work because you are doing such amazing things that change our lives for the better. So for those who don't know how incredible you are and what you do, please tell us a little bit about your work.
Sure. Well, I'm a landscape architect and an urban designer. I know a lot of people don't actually understand what a landscape architect is, so maybe I'll just take a moment to explain what that profession is. It's about the design, planning, and management of landscapes at any scale, really. It can happen at any scale. And by landscapes, I mean all of our external spaces, all of our landscapes, the waterfront, our parks, plazas, even streets are often designed by landscape architects. So any external space, even including rooftop terraces, that sort of thing. But then landscape architects also get involved in the strategic planning and management of much larger landscapes as well. So not only do they design smaller spaces, but sometimes they're looking at whole regions and looking at how the whole landscape framework fits together and works with the human development of an area. So anyway, my work at Urban, it really started by looking at city spaces and how we could connect people to nature to bring joy and delight into their daily lives. But since our early days, I think our project size and scale and scope has continued to expand. And so now we're often looking at those regional landscapes that I was just describing to you and looking at how we can bring health and well-being to the whole natural processes and systems of a region.
I just think it's not only fascinating what you do, but it's so fundamental to how we can flourish and how we can thrive. And I know from living in Milton Keynes, which was the designed city, how important your work is, because I love the fact I can walk from one lake to another lake and not cross a single road. And that does my well-being so much good, especially if I'm cycling as well, because I'm afraid of roads. And it just means that not only do I get the opportunity to cycle, but I'm calm and I'm happy doing it as well. So there's so many things we don't realize that the landscape architect can impact on.
That's right. And I think most often people don't even recognize that they're in a design space. So often when you're walking down the street or when you're walking through a plaza or along the waterfront, you don't necessarily understand or think about the fact that these are design spaces. They just don't come about naturally, especially I think when we are in places that seem natural, but in this day and age, most landscapes are impacted by humans in some ways, whether it be intentional design or not. We have impacted pretty much all landscapes. So there is design and management involved in each one of these things.
Now, I do detect there is a little bit of a concern in your voice when you say humans impact the landscape, because, of course, whilst people like yourself can design amazing things and work with the landscape, there are people who are destroying it. And unfortunately, this is, I would say, part of life. I don't think it has to be. But that's why something like Earth Day is so important. And the theme for Earth Day is protection from plastics. But plastics, that's not the only thing we need to be aware of. So what are some of your key concerns when it comes to the environment and how we're treating it?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, because Earth Day has a really interesting beginning. It started, I believe, in 1970. And this is when the whole environmental movement really kicked off. So this year, it's really focusing on plastic pollution. But that is just one element, as you say, of many, many issues that our environment is challenged with today. So even back in 1970, when Earth Day began, they were looking to raise awareness and concern about the environment, about all living organisms, not just human health, but all living organisms. But then also how important it is to consider the environment in terms of public health, and that inextricable link that is there between our health and well-being and our environment's health and well-being. So they can't be considered separately. They have to be considered in totality and in terms of how we are interdependent and interconnected. So, going back to the question about plastics, as you say, that's just one of many, many issues. We're looking at carbon emissions and greenhouse gases, and the list goes on and on about overfishing and exploitation of natural resources. And our world is being sort of raped and pillaged before our eyes. And this has, since 1970, when Earth Day began, it's escalated and accelerated at an incredible rate. I think they would have been very surprised to see how much damage could possibly happen in those coming decades that we have now witnessed over the last few decades. So there's so much devastation, so much destruction. Our Earth is now just contaminated and polluted at such a degree that really significant Earth system tipping points have been breached already, and many more are just sort of on the edge of being breached. And our scientists tell us this. There's consensus about this fact, and there's also consensus about the fact that we need to make change immediately and within this decade to really restore things and bring about recovery and rehabilitation and healing before things get too bad and we've sort of exceeded these tipping points.
And this was the subject of your wonderful book, Portrait to Landscape. And this gives us almost a blueprint for making those changes. Do you mind just sharing what inspired you to write that? And it's beautifully written. I do urge everybody to read it. It's easily accessible, and what you say is really profound and really inspirational.
Oh, thank you, Audrey. Well, yeah, I was very inspired to write the book because I could see so clearly that landscape holds the potential to bring about that rehabilitation and that healing that is so desperately required. And yet so often landscape just is not considered. And it's one of the professions, I'd say landscape architecture is a profession that doesn't have a lot of clout or even a lot of members. So it often sits sort of lower on the totem pole, especially in terms of development. So typically in the development process, the development is considered first, and then the landscape is expected to sit around that. But we will never achieve environmental health while we have a system that puts development at the forefront and landscape as an afterthought. So what I was really looking to do with this book was to share with the world, and not just speaking to other landscape architects who already know the benefits, but to the world about why landscape is so important and why it's important for them to advocate for it and to, bring in politicians that care about it and to, use their voting power, using their responsibility as citizens, making choices about the food they eat, about how they travel. These are things that everyone can get involved with, and they all impact the landscape, and they all impact sort of our relationship to nature. So this book, when I say Portrait to Landscape, it's really about a reorientation of our perspective. So from looking just at human wants and desires, and looking at the economy and that sort of greed economy that we're currently situated within, and then turning that out to the landscape, to a much broader lens, looking at the whole community of life. So, not only is it from this way to this way, but it's from inwards to outwards, and embracing all of nature and all of life in our outlook and our way of inhabiting this earth.
And it gives me absolute pleasure to introduce our documentary on Alexandra Steed, Through My Eyes. When you look around, what do you see? Humans have always been biophilic. We have an innate affinity with imagery and sensations that remind us of what we see in nature. Plus, the fresh air helps clear our lungs, And the sunlight naturally stimulates the production of vitamin D, which assists our immune system, and can boost the uptake of serotonin, which helps regulate our sleep and appetite. But some can see destruction. Landscape architect Alexandra Steed has dedicated her work to what she describes as repairing humans' broken relationship with nature.
For me, the utmost expression of beauty in our world is nature. Both of my parents were gardeners, they were avid gardeners, and so that was instilled in me from a very young age to love the beauty of the world around us. And so I think that's always been sort of a key quest of mine, is to search for beauty in all things. I then went on to study art, and there I found I was often focusing on the natural world, so doing prints of beautiful trees or paintings of landscapes. And through the course of my degree, I realized actually I would much rather than be depicting the landscape to be creating the landscapes and to create places which were very inviting for people and would engage people and connect them to the natural world. I hadn't even heard of landscape architecture, but I bumped into a friend at university, and he described to me that he was taking this course. And as soon as I heard about it, I just thought, oh, well, that's for me. That's perfect. And so I went ahead and did a master's degree in landscape, and I've never looked back. We've been born into quite a dysfunctional relationship with the natural world in our urban environments, especially in the Western world. I believe that we are probably more disconnected from nature. There's so many reasons for this. It's a very complicated issue. We are now living in very urbanized and industrial spaces. And so as a default, we are disconnected from the land. If you look at our streets, we're severed from the soil beneath our feet. The soil and the water and the air above are all disconnected from each other as well. So it's this horrible kind of situation where everything has become disconnected when in reality it all should be connected, and that's what makes things thrive.
The feeling of demand and exploitation is something Alexandra has faced down professionally as well. Research from trade journals finds that only 31% of architects are female. In academia, 55% of males are given tenure and only 40% of females. And 75% of males take an associate degree compared to 25% of females.
You know, in the design industry, and I'm sure in many industries, there's so much pressure on people to be working long hours, not taking care of themselves in the way they could be. And what I wanted to do at Urban was to create an environment where we could do both. We could have an excellent product and experience for our clients and feel that we were producing work of the highest quality, but at the same time showing it's entirely possible to do that while ensuring quality of life for the team. A lot of women I know, including myself, have found that in certain work environments, we've really had to go above and beyond to prove ourselves. We've had to work harder, longer hours, possibly have greater education behind us to be able to achieve what many of our male colleagues are able to achieve. And at the same time, often women in their 20s or 30s are having children. And so they're having to take time off to attend to that, of course. And I think it can make them feel limited in what they're able to achieve. So all of these things can be very difficult for women. And then, of course, there's the fact that at the senior level, there aren't as many women. So therefore, there's not as many mentors for the young women trying to come up through the ranks. I know that was something I really struggled with, to find a female mentor, because it isn't always comfortable for a man and a woman to be in a mentoring situation. It can become complicated and nuanced and gray, and there's a huge amount of sexual harassment in the workplace. I mean, all over the place. I've dealt with it. Many of my female colleagues have dealt with it. And it's terribly difficult to work in that kind of environment.
In spite of all the work that has been done, I think women do still face many challenges in the workplace, unfortunately. We're looking at gender bias, stereotypes, unequal opportunities, stigma around women's health, and all of these things, I think, have a very real psychological impact. If women feel a particular pressure to prove themselves, for example, they're likely very quickly to start struggling with anxiety, stress, leading her to start perhaps doubting her abilities, questioning her performance, and we start to see things like imposter syndrome creeping in. We know that even full-time working women are still bearing responsibility for the majority of domestic responsibilities and childcare responsibilities. And because of the maternal bias that they're facing in the workplace, they also feel this huge pressure, I think, to prove their commitment to the job. And this comes across in many different ways. It might mean working extra hours. It might mean volunteering for extra projects. And I think one of the really damaging impacts is that it means it's very hard for women to ask for what they need to actually improve their work-life balance. The other thing that I see a lot in practice is guilt. We see a lot of, what we might call mum guilt, I suppose. They're managing the domestic and the childcare on the one hand, and they're also managing their paid employment on the other. And often very wrongly, actually, but women can often feel they're not really living up to expectation in either. The reality is that changing the narrative is challenging. And it's challenging because there are very deep-rooted societal and cultural norms that we are trying to push against. And I think what we really need is a collective effort to change the narrative. It means having very open conversations, including male voices. And I genuinely think that, male allies play a pivotal role in challenging and changing the status quo.
It's kind of sad to say, but as a female Asian being here in the UK, to be honest, I've been through a couple of occasions of discrimination, but here in urban, I'm very happy. I feel very lucky that I'm working under the leadership of Alexandra, who showed us example of the possibility of breaking through the glass ceiling of a male-dominated industry. And I feel by saying that, I have the passion and hope to work towards a more equal and inclusive industry.
I've definitely always been aware that it is more male, especially my background is in architecture, which is even more male necessarily than landscape architecture. But I've always tried to be a bit particular with the offices that I work for. I have just had a much more enriching experience working with women or female identifying people in the profession. And that's not to say sometimes male professors or colleagues haven't been supportive, but it has often been a more enriching experience.
I think it's very important the team that you are surrounded by. I think the people that is working with you, your colleagues, I think it's very important that they encourage you, that you feel supported by them, that they recognize your hard work.
This nurturing, nourishing approach has reaped rewards, with Urban achieving a number of awards for their work.
Study by Alexandra Steed, Urban.
Sea Park is the name for the vision that we gave to the landscape strategy for the area of South Essex. So Sea Park stands for South Essex Estuary Park. A number of years ago now, I'd say it was in 2019, ASALA, who are the Association of South Essex Local Authorities, all came together because they knew they had to look at the whole of the South Essex region in totality. So they were looking for a series of major strategic frameworks to be put in place for the whole area, one of which was a green and blue infrastructure strategy. So that's what our team was commissioned to complete. One of the exciting things about this project was ASALA realized just how important the landscape strategy was to their region, and they understood that by putting in place a very sort of robust framework, that all of South Essex could be integrated and coordinated in a way that would not only protect the environment, but also protect the communities and the businesses and even the industry that exist within South Essex.
You know, when you think about landscape, I think people often think of it just in terms of greening up spaces, quite decorative, when in fact, it's the very foundation of all of our development. It has always existed. It will continue to exist well beyond any development that we as human civilization will deliver. It is the foundation of everything, and it allows for the purification of our water. It allows for decomposition of our waste materials. It allows, you know, for air purification, and the list goes on and on and on about the services and the gifts that nature provides. So the landscape strategy was looking to do all of those things, and in this particular project, we then allocated 30% of the whole of South Essex to be protected landscape areas that would complete a connected framework for the whole region. When we start sort of at the North Sea, coming into the Thames estuary, there's an area called the Island Wetlands. Then we had another one called the Woodland Arc that connected through Rochford. The Central Thames Marshlands that connected areas from Basildon through Castle Point all the way to Thurrock. And then another one that sweeps up through the Mardyke Valley, up through Thurrock and into Brentwood. And then we had the Brentwood Parklands. So there's these 5 major landscapes. And in each of them, it was all about connecting areas of quality landscape, so where there's intact ecosystems, where there's places for local wildlife, where there's important sort of flood mitigation, marshes, heritage areas that have, you know, really magical qualities about them. So we were sort of knitting together all of these places to come up with a connected strategy across these 6 local authorities.
Getting people to have a better connection with the landscape, the coasts, and that's done through pathway improvements like rights of way improvements, signage, interpretation, and just like actual interventions that help people make that connection. So there's like a big bird hide, there's some observation decks, there's some better seating. It's nothing like overly ambitious. It's still like a good, like low intervention way of getting people a bit more connected with the coast.
There's a term that's becoming relatively popular in the profession, and it's called landscape-led. So if we were to truly be led by the land, then by default, we would have to be working in a sensitive way with the environment. We would have to be working within a context that is very particular with certain ecosystems, certain wildlife communities, streams, soils, you know, all of these things would be considered. That is my hope for the future, that the development industry will truly become landscape-led. And then by doing that, supporting plants and animals and us, you know, when we create healthy environments, then of course we benefit greatly. You know, there are absolutely no disadvantages to human health and well-being when we work with an environment and respect the natural ecosystems of that area. So that is my hope, that in the future, rather than imposing development on a place, we'll be situating development within a particular landscape. This is something that we need to see across all aspects of society. So whether it's in the profession of architecture and landscape architecture, within the development industry, within sort of our political structures, within the way we approach landscapes. I think for all of it, it's about creating places of equilibrium, of balance, of health and well-being. I really wanted not just landscape architects, but the world to know why landscapes are so important. One of the main points that I make in the book is that, you know, landscapes are the manifestation of the human relationship with nature. It is within the landscape that is physically expressed. Across all of the world's landscapes, urban, rural, wilderness, are places that are laden with contamination and pollution and devastation and destruction. The landscape is where that expression is manifest, but it's also the very place where healing can occur. And that is exactly why they are so important and why we need to be focused on our landscapes. Because if we are to bring about health and well-being, regeneration, revitalization, it will be manifest in the landscape, and that is where we can rehabilitate our relationship to nature. That's how I see it.
I had so much fun making that because I learned so much from you and your team, and it was wonderful visiting the sites that you had been working on as well. Now, whilst making that feature, I learned you'd released the book, your company had turned 10 years old, you've won numerous awards. I mean, how does it feel for you almost seeing that celebrated and showcased, especially when it comes to recognizing your leadership for other females out there?
Well, that's very lovely of you to say. I think, while it's really wonderful to have these opportunities to celebrate and to be awarded in that way, I think probably my biggest sense of celebration is just to be able to experience the landscapes that we're able to create and to see how various environments have been revitalized, to see the birds and the bees and other living things thriving in a place. So often we've had the opportunity to, for example, turn an asphalt car park into a revitalized landscape. And when you just see the difference, it's just, it's breathtaking. And I don't think there could be anything more rewarding than that. And then I think in terms of how people are affected by that, for example, I was at a party a couple of weeks ago, just a friend of mine had a party, and I met a guy there that said that he worked at Sky TV. And I said, oh, well, we've just redesigned that campus in London. And he said, oh, no kidding. I love that landscape. And he said, I spend so much time walking through the gardens. And he said, in particular, there's this path that goes through perennial gardens with a bench in it. And he said, I absolutely love going out there and sitting and having my lunch or just having the opportunity to think and be refreshed. And so when I hear things like that, that is really thrilling for me. And I don't think anything is better than seeing how you can improve people's quality of life like that. And then in terms of other females in the industry, I'd say that's probably quite difficult for me to gauge what kind of impact I've had on other women's lives. But, I hope other women that I've been in touch with, and there's been many, many women over the course of my career that I've had the privilege of working with. And I would say, I just really hope that they feel inspired and supported and empowered to keep moving forward with their own pursuits and their own visions and their own goals within their own life. And I've had the opportunity to mentor a number of women, and that's delightful. But, I've also learned so much from so many other women, even if it's indirectly, just, having the opportunity to watch some of my former female bosses and how they negotiated certain situations and how they sort of were able to have their voice heard, maybe in a place where that can sometimes be difficult, or to get their idea through in a really sort of positive way. So, I've learned so much too from other women in my life.
That's really lovely. And that heartfelt warmth really comes across. It's lovely to hear you say that. And kind of leads me on to my next question. Who are some of your own personal inspirations?
Right. Well, who I was thinking about just then when I was speaking was a former boss of mine named Martha Schwartz. She is a landscape architect in the industry. She's very well known. But she's done some wonderful work over the years and really was a trailblazer in terms of getting the word out about what landscape architects can offer and the beauty and the importance of design of our external spaces. So I'd say she's a real champion in terms of landscape architecture. And I had the opportunity to work under her for a number of years. So that was a real positive in my life. I mean, there's many other women I could mention, but she was especially coming to mind just then. And then I think, as I was thinking about Earth Day, Rachel Carson, who is the author of Silent Spring. So she wrote that book back in the 60s, and it really set the whole environmental movement into motion. So that book, her book, Silent Spring, was a real catalyst for that whole movement. And hundreds of thousands of people read that book. And suddenly, the whole topic of our impact on the earth and, how we're contaminating it and polluting it and infecting water systems and soils and bird life, all these things she brought to light. And she was incredible because even in the face of a huge amount of opposition from the petrochemical industry in particular, they were harsh with her. They called her a charlatan and a Luddite and a hysterical woman. They tried to debunk everything that she was saying. And yet she just carried on. And, with a great deal of poise and grace, just carried on with her message. She wasn't going to be silenced. And so she's a real hero. I think she's, somebody that still is a great inspiration all these years later. And then I'd say a newer found hero for me is Vandana Shiva. And she is an Indian scholar, philosopher, scientist, a real rock star of the environmental movement. And she has set, sort of a concept. She came up with a concept called Earth democracy. And that is really about looking at the whole Earth and all the living systems, all of nature, and the importance that everything has to offer to that system. So it's not just about human health and well-being. It's also about our soils, our water, our forests, our fish. All of these things are what make human life joyful and wonderful and that allow our existence. And she hits the nail on the head when she says that we must therefore respect the rights and the value inherent in all of these living things, and to consider it as a family. So it's also very interesting in terms of sort of an ethic that looks at how we, in this age that we're in that's so dominated by economics, and she brings to light, look, all of economics is dependent on natural resources, on our water, on our soils, on the food that's produced. All of these things are utterly dependent on the earth. So therefore, even in our economic structures, we must respect that.
You put it so eloquently. And what I love about this is, on the one hand, people speak about the benefits of nature, and I will be asking you about what you do for your own health and well-being, but we all talk about going for walks and going for cold water swims and so on. But unless we respect the very places that we are going to do those things will no longer exist. And I don't think we make that connection enough. So with that, what are your key things that you do for your own health and well-being?
Well, I probably could do more. At the moment, I have a bit of a cold. So anyway, that's nothing compared to what could be going on. But at the moment, I'm actually situated in North Vancouver. So I'm on the side of a mountain, and it's beautiful. It's just spectacular where I'm situated at the moment. And, I have this marvelous forest behind me, and in front of me, I have a view out over the bay around Vancouver and looking out to the islands and that sort of thing. So, it's so easy here. I find it very easy when I'm in a place like Vancouver to get out. I only have to walk 2 minutes, and I'm on a beautiful stream corridor that's so fresh and lovely, quiet, birds singing. So I do try and get out every day into nature. Here, like I said, it's easier than in some places. Normally, I'm situated in London, and I do the same thing there, but the spaces are just slightly different. They tend to be more design spaces, like we were talking about earlier. So making sure I spend time walking along the canal or walking through squares and parks and having moments to sort of meditate within nature and just feel the beauty and the warmth of the life around me. So I do, put special effort into finding time like that and to walk most places. So I don't drive. I tend to walk almost everywhere. And so, of course, I just have that opportunity then to be out and about in hopefully fresh air, not always fresh air, but moving from place to place. And so that's one way that I keep myself healthy and find exercise just sort of woven into my daily routine. But I also do things I really enjoy, a Pilates class with a group of friends. And so not only is that great for our physical well-being, but we have so much fun. It's a group of women and we just love being together. So that's excellent. And then, of course, I think what we consume is probably the most important thing. So, choosing the foods that I eat very carefully. I had a wonderful naturopath when I was about 30 years old that introduced me to a whole new way of eating and considering sort of my digestive system and what I put into my body. And it really it was so enlightening for me to see the connection between the land and our own bodies that he taught me originally. So I really try and choose organic foods, foods that have been grown on sustainable farms and organic farms, eating loads of vegetables and fruits and whole foods, that sort of thing. Really, I know makes a huge difference to my health.
Definitely. And what is next for you? Your life is so exciting and you have so much going on. What are your next goals and visions?
Well, at the moment, I'm still sort of in this book phase, I suppose. So I've just released this book that we were speaking about. And so at the moment, I'm hoping to spread the word about the book and get the ideas within the book out there so that people start to think about the importance of landscape, the importance of the land and our relationship to it, and how we can go about practically restoring that relationship. It needs to happen at a vast scale. So, I'm trying to get the word out there and letting everybody know what they can do individually to bring about that much needed change. And then in terms of my work, well, that's just sort of carrying on as we were. So we're really, we're doing work of all scales because we really do believe at every scale it's important what we do and how we connect back to the land and make those kind of healing moves about restoring that connection to ourselves and, between the air, between the soils and water, between plants and animals and all living things. So no matter what scale we're working at, that's always key for us. But we are looking more at these regional strategies because I do believe it's at a large scale that we need to bring about the most change and it has the opportunity for the most impact. So I am focusing more on those large scale regional frameworks. And I think there aren't enough people doing them either. So we know how to do that. And so I think that's probably the most important thing we can offer to the world at this point.
Fabulous. And whereabouts can we find you and learn more about your work and, of course, purchase your book?
Well, the book is for sale on Amazon. It's on many platforms, but the sort of key location at the moment is Amazon. Our website is www.alexandrasteedurban.com. So you can, hear more about how and what we're doing there. And we're on Instagram under Alexandra Steed Urban. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Twitter, Facebook, all of those platforms. So I think you can quite easily find us.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Audrey.
And our resident guest expert today is John Goldwyn of Wild 15, also a landscape architect and master planner, and he is going to be telling us why reducing plastics for Earth Day is only part of the main issue, but also give us tips on the other things that we can do.
I think that plastic waste is one of these things that is often pushed on to people like you and me, because it's something we can concentrate on. So there's a good side to that, which is obviously we can start to recycle, and we can hopefully cut down the amount of plastic that we buy, and so that we put less plastic into the waste stream. And that's the positive side, and that's something we absolutely should be doing. But I think it's actually a little bit dangerous to say that if we sort out plastic waste, then the world's going to be okay. I think that actually there's a much bigger problem there. And what's interesting about World Earth Day is it tries to focus on an important issue or an important element each year. But I think by focusing us on plastic waste, we might think less about more important issues. There's very few people or very few firms and governments and big companies that are creating the problem. And by them pushing it to us, the consumers, to sort it out, you end up very quickly feeling guilty for someone else's wrongdoing. None of us want to have plastic in the world. I never meet people that say, gosh, I'm so pleased I bought all this plastic wrapped product. And it's very difficult because and we're always blamed as consumers or as citizens, and actually it's big business that is responsible for most of the environmental degradation. If you read Michaela Loach's book, It's Not That Radical, then she speaks a lot about the guilt that we feel and about the fact that really it's big oil companies and big governments that do deals with big oil companies and petrochemicals and all of the plastics that relate to that are actually the problem. And so, as I said, we need to make sure that we don't take too much of that as guilt on ourselves. But also, at the same time, we need to be lobbying these people, and we need to be voting locally and nationally for people that won't stand up for this. And again, governments are often funded by these people as well. So it's an incredibly complex day that you can have if you start thinking about this. It's about understanding how you live within your means, how you live within your sphere, live a little bit more locally. I mean, we all love to take holidays and we all love to go to nice places. That's fine. Don't beat yourself up about that. But on a daily basis, maybe just buy seasonal vegetables, maybe stroll to your local farmer's market rather than buying plastic wrapped elements from a supermarket. Think about the impact that you can have locally. As I said, the community element of this is huge, because if you can build community and you can create better local dynamics in retail and things like that. To start with that, I mean, to go back to the impact of plastic, which is, where we started, if you think about it, the only place on Earth that they haven't found microplastic, which is the very small plastic that plastic breaks down to from bigger bits of plastic, is in Arctic ice. And I'm talking about historic Arctic ice, because obviously it froze many years, possibly even thousands of tens of thousands years ago, and is now melting for various reasons that we won't go into. But that's the only place on the planet that plastic hasn't reached into. They found it in very remote rainforest areas. It's been picked up in precipitation and ocean currents, etc., etc. So that the plastic that we're talking about has encircled the entire globe, as I said, except for areas that are preserved before the plastic existed. So think about, how do we start to unwind that? How do we start to unwind this kind of global reach that we have on the planet? And as I said, it starts locally. So if you buy vegetables that have been farmed on a small holding rather than in a massive industrial farm, which uses huge amounts of pesticides and fertilizers and has damage to the soil, a lot of our existence is based, this sounds really boring, but it's actually really important. Our existence is based on having healthy soil. So if we protect our soils, then they absorb better when it rains and if there's a flood event, etc., etc. So good farming will create good soils. Good soils will create less flooding, less problems with rivers bursting their banks, etc., etc. So again, when you start adding it all together, then you end up with this small little action that you make of buying the carrots that were farmed locally rather than in Valencia or the United States or Peru or something like that. Suddenly you're starting to put together a web of existence that relates very much to your local sphere, but also is impacting big agriculture, big business, etc., etc. And that's the beautiful thing. We vote with our wallets every day. Every decision that we make is voting with our wallets. And this kind of money is what's driving big business. So while I say that big business is the thing that has to change and it needs to be done at governmental level, on a local level, if all of us make the right choices, then we can actually start to make a difference.
So interesting listening to John there, because I know plastics, reducing waste, that is something we can all do, we can all get a handle on, but we do need to talk to MPs, we do need to lobby the government. We have a voice, albeit a small one, but we have a voice that we can use as well to really help preserve our world.
Absolutely, and I was just thinking actually that in my other role, I work with the community, and there's a river, and a few months ago it got really badly polluted, and I was quite surprised to see how much the community jumped on it straight away. And of course we did in our capacity. We contacted the Environment Agency and all the agencies that needed to be contacted. But it was really encouraging to see how much the residents really cared about the river and the fact that it was being polluted, and they were lobbying our MP, etc., just as you say.
Yeah.
So if that's the way things are going, I think that's extremely encouraging, but a lot more needs to be done by the people, the MPs, the government, who can do.
Yes, once it gets up to that
Exactly.
stage. Very similarly, I've signed a petition. This was where they were thinking of using a lake that we all do wild swimming in to become another area for dumping waste. And it was just signing a petition, but still, it's something. You can still do something and have a say in what's going on. So that's the broader picture. On a smaller basis, we all try to recycle. We all try to reduce our waste. Any particular things that you do that you really like?
Yes, well, at home our tap water is really terrible. It's really terrible. So I'm kind of ashamed to say it now, but we've been buying bottled water for years. And about a year ago, we took a stand and we said, no, that the amount of plastic that just we drink, so you multiply that. So we stopped, and I bought some glass carafes, and I bought some charcoal filters, and I put our tap water in there, and I leave it overnight, and we have beautifully tasting, clean water. And so that's just a small thing that we did, but it's made a huge difference just to us. So if that was replicated, you can just see how much of a difference that we can make.
Exactly. These are all things that can be done. And one thing that we do is with the plastic, you can actually fill a plastic bottle with things like crisp packets and all of that and make something called eco bricks.
I've heard of
and these eco bricks are really quite solid, and they're then reused in gardens and other places to make structures.
Oh, wow.
And there are
Amazing.
limited places that collect them, but they do collect them. So it is worth looking for your nearest eco brick recycling centre. And they are very, very strong structures. So there's always... And another thing that I did... I was never a guide, but I got friends.
I was.
Upcycling.
Yes.
Really important as well. So I think that could be a whole other show.
I think absolutely it could be. Yeah, it should be.
And on that note, if you have any shows that you would like us to produce, any topics you'd like us to cover, please drop us a line on studio@wellbeingmedia.org. As for today, from myself and Judith, thank you for tuning in. Have a healthy week.